G'day, you absolute first-class legends. Welcome to the Talking Chang podcast, episode 4. I'm in my new house. It's 2019. It is a very large room, so I've got a bit of an echo problem, which I need to sort out, do some soundproofing or something. I've put a rug down, but we've got a few more things to do, so bear with me with the sound. But other than that, we have, in this episode, we have Craig Richards. Now, Craig is the CEO of the Bicycle Network. He's a seasoned veteran in the cycling world. He's been doing this for well over 10 years. Not as the CEO, but he sort of worked his way through in the Bicycle Network up to the head honcho's position. And Craig is an avid cyclist. He is a commuter. We talk about all things cycling. This is a cycling podcast, essentially. And we discuss some interesting topics. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Let's cut straight to the chase. And I'll see you in the next episode. I've been looking forward to this chat because there's a lot of topics that we want to cover. There's a lot of things that, you know, mandatory helmet laws and things like that I want to discuss with you, and the different angles, the different opinions on it. Look, we may as well just talk about your background first, and then we'll go into that stuff. You've been at the Bicycle Network for what? Almost an eternity.
11 years. Long service leave. It's almost unheard of in this day and age. I don't know if I'll ever get to take it, but it's kind of nice to know.
Yeah. So long service. Have you taken your long service yet?
No. Too busy. Too much to do.
That's 3 months' pay, mate. I'd be bloody going to Italy.
I know, it's incredible too. I'd love to. But yeah, no, unfortunately too, I've got a lot of other holidays. There's so much to do in this bike world. I can't get through my normal holidays, let alone think about long service leave. But yeah it's just incredible.
So you say there's a lot to do in the bike world. What is it that you do on the daily as CEO of the Bicycle Network? And I mean, really, what is the Bicycle Network?
Yeah, look, our job is to make it easier for everyone to ride a bike every day. So we've got this goal that we're trying to do. We're trying to, like all not-for-profits, your actual job is, how do you do yourself out of business? What's the problem? How do you solve the problem and move on? Now, the problem we see as the big problem is this thing called physical inactivity, where just not enough people get enough physical activity. And that has a huge implications for their health. So our job is to get people physically active. The big thing is, how are you going to do that? What's the way to get people to get enough physical activity? Because the interesting thing is, you've got to do 5 sets of physical activity a week. There's lots of people who actually exercise fairly seriously, and a lot of people who are riding their bike, you know, they go out on the weekend one day and they punch out 100 kilometres and then they go for 2 rides during the week. They don't get enough physical activity to meet the guidelines. So what we're really trying to do is mean that if you ride a bike every day of your life just to get yourself around, then you'll get enough physical activity. So that's our job. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
You know, I suppose you're trying to do it with a cycling sort of aspect. You could just about have a CrossFit network and really is it just any sort of activity, going to the gym?
Well, look, you could. I mean, reality, if someone went to the gym 5 days a week, honestly, I say, well, that's not my problem. They're getting enough physical activity. But people don't go to the gym 5 days a week. People start F45. They don't continue it. No disrespect to F45. Great stuff. Everyone's having a great time. But do you reckon in 10 years' time, people are still going to be doing F45 5 days a week?
Yeah.
They're probably not. They'll get busy, they'll have kids, they'll change jobs, they'll drop off. So what we try and do is build physical activity into people's lives. And the great thing about bike riding is once it's part of your life, it's just something you do. You don't think about it. How are you going to get around? How are you going to get to the shops? How are you going to get to work? How are you going to get to school? You just jump on your bike and off you go. And that way you've got your physical activity without it being something you have to go, I need to think about this. I need to work out how to do it. You know, and people come home from work and say, I'm too tired, I'm not going to get up early in the morning. So we just build it into people's lives.
Yeah, I can see the point. I mean, commuting is probably one of the best ways to get people, because they're killing 2 birds with one stone. They're going to work and they're commuting on a bike. The problem that we've got, 2 problems that we've got, I suppose, holding people back is Melbourne, the weather. The weather in Melbourne. You'd have to be a sort of hardcore commuter, wouldn't you?
Oh, not really. I mean, people say that about the weather, but, you know, we see, and we all look to Europe in many ways because it's the thing everyone loves and talks about. And you look at what they do over there. They're in, say, Denmark or, you know, in Copenhagen, where they ride a lot, obviously, and, you know, they get their commuting numbers are up around 50% of people are getting to work on their bike. They're doing it in the snow. I mean, that just spins my mind. Like, I've actually never been in a situation where it's been minus 20 degrees. I don't even actually know if I've ever been somewhere where it's been minus degrees. But, when it's minus something, they just keep riding. So there's that old saying that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad clothing.
This is true, yeah. You do need, obviously, warm clothes. The other problem is you heat up pretty quickly and then you start stripping clothes off. But, just talking about Copenhagen, you look at places like that where there's so many cyclists on the road going to and from work. And Hannah and I had an insight into this when we went to Amsterdam. I just couldn't believe how many people were riding bicycles last year. And why don't we have this here in Melbourne?
Yeah, we have little pockets of it, which is kind of interesting. Like I ride to work through the northern suburbs, and there's some places there when people see them, they're kind of stunned. Like, you go down Canning Street, which has been one of the long-standing bike streets. And sometimes at the traffic lights there in peak hour, you'll be in a group of 30, 40 bike riders wanting to get through the traffic lights.
Yeah.
And people who see that go, it blows their mind a little bit. Because what we see with these bike riding, with a lot of things, once others start doing it, your neighbours do it, everyone does it, it just becomes a normal thing. So like we see these little pockets, as I say, northern suburbs of Melbourne is one where a lot of people are riding their bikes. People have got bikes on all their balconies. So we're seeing it starting to spread, but we've still got a long way to go. And no doubt the biggest thing that holds people back is places to ride. They want to have places to ride where they feel comfortable, and they want to have a place where they feel they're not going to have an interaction with a vehicle or a person driving a vehicle. That's going to be an unpleasant one.
Yeah. Well, what's the biggest thing stopping people from, across the board in Melbourne? I mean, we see the traffic is just getting horrendous. I mean, I'm a cyclist, but I also drive to and from work. And I cannot believe that in the last 10 years how bad the traffic is getting. And I often wonder why people don't just ride to work. Because, I mean, I'm different. I'm a sales rep, so I'm sort of out on the road and I have to go from location to location all around the CBD. But there's a lot of people just going into work and coming out of work from the city.
Yep. Yeah, the biggest thing that just stops them is it's this concern where we have this group of people, and it's been found around the world that roughly 60% of people are called the interested but concerned. They're interested in riding a bike, but they're concerned. And they're concerned that they might get hit by a car. That's what's worrying them. So if we can overcome the concern, people will start riding. And we know that whenever you provide good places to ride, the numbers of people riding bikes just goes up. But of course, the problem we've got with a lot of around Melbourne, we've got lots of good bits of bike infrastructure, as we do in a lot of Australian cities, but the gaps between them cause a problem. And there's another old saying that your bike commute's only as good as the worst piece of infrastructure. So you might have a beautiful separated piece of infrastructure you're riding along, and then suddenly, for whether it's 500 metres or whether it's 2 kilometres, you're right in the thick of it, and then you're stuck in amongst a lot of cars, and it might be trams and the whole thing, and people go, I don't want a piece of that. So that's what we need to overcome. We need to provide end-to-end solutions for people to ride their bikes. And that's what we try and do. So we do a lot of work with the government to try and say, hey, this is what we need to do. We need to provide these conditions and these facilities, and that will get more people riding bikes. And, of course, that will make them fitter and healthier, but it will help solve this congestion problem as well.
Yeah. Is it infrastructure? Is that the big problem, or is it attitudes of drivers?
The biggest thing, look, I say that it's all the pieces put together that are important. And that's one thing I reckon I've seen in the bike world, which has been kind of interesting. People think there's one silver bullet. There's not one silver bullet. You need all the bits right for it to work. No doubt infrastructure is an important one, but if you have bad attitudes from people driving cars, that's a problem as well. You need to get all the pieces together, but infrastructure is, and we call it places to ride rather than infrastructure because it's a bit of a techie sort of term. Good places to ride certainly makes a massive difference, and that's the one that most people in the bike world pretty much agree with. No, we know we need these places to ride, and that's certainly a big start, but there's lots of other pieces as well, and sometimes we talk about there's the hardware and the software, and you need to put the two together to get it all to work. Yeah.
So I've always thought that it's helmets are a big problem. Like even on my YouTube channel for years, I've been I'd go to the cafe and I'd sort of ride down to the cafe with me holding the camera, vlogging away, and then I'd get people in the comments say, "Where's your helmet?" And yet the funny thing about it is you look at any photo, all you have to do is Google Copenhagen or Amsterdam, and you look at any of thousands of cyclists riding to and from work, and there's not a helmet in sight, right? So whilst I am a big advocate for helmets in certain situations, racing bikes, for example, anywhere where you're travelling at speed, I think going down to the cafe without a helmet is a pretty reasonable thing to do. And I'm pretty sure that there's no evidence to show that, there's more head injuries in Copenhagen than there is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, look, and we've just been through our big review of mandatory helmet laws because they've been in Australia now for a long time, since 1990. And it's just become very much amongst big sections of the Australian public just accepted, and they shake their head and think, how could you ever think of doing this activity without having a helmet on? But as you say, what they see people who are riding their bikes generally on main roads in Lycra at speed, and that's what they associate it with. They don't associate it with this great other huge number of people who are riding their bikes at low speed in circumstances where they're not mixing with vehicles. So interestingly, as you say, the rest of the world didn't follow Australia's lead when it comes to mandatory helmet laws. You would have probably thought back in 1990, the rest of the world will go this way and this is what will happen because we've become what I'd call a pretty conservative world. We're a bit of a nanny state, Australia, aren't we? Oh, it's very interesting, at times I'd like to think I was clever enough to be sort of study history or something and think, how did we go from convicts? We started this sort of convicts place where we didn't like authority to now we're very much lots of people saying no, more authority, more laws, more regulations, more things, control people. But we bring it back to bikes, and the key to the bike is it should just be easy. You should just be able to hop on your bike and pedal away. Yep. It shouldn't be complicated. The more things you make it complicated, as I'm going to get on my bike and now I'm going to need a helmet. I'm going to need to get this. I'm going to, people say, you should get a registration. Other people say, you should have to wear a green jacket. You should have to get an orange flag. That came up in the States once. Some state wanted to make it compulsory to have an orange flag on the back of your bike. The more things you say, you need to make it. It just gets harder and harder, and people go, I just can't be bothered, because you should be able to, when it comes to get on your bike, you should be able to just say, where do I need to go? I need to go here. There's a bike. I'm on. I'm away. And people liken it to things in cars, but when you get in your car, all you need is the key. You don't need anything else but a key. All the stuff's already in the car. The lights are in the car. The seat belt's in the car. All this equipment. It's not like you've got to go out and make a specific effort to make this happen. And that's one of the things that, when it comes to helmets, just one more barrier in the way. And it does make people worry too, because they look at a helmet and think, Jesus, this activity is so dangerous that I can't do it without a helmet, when the reality is the danger is not that great.
Yeah, it's, I've been riding, I'm sure you've been riding bikes for a long time. I've been riding bikes for nearly 30 years and racing. And I can count on one hand the amount of times I've crashed, and particularly going down to the shop. It's so it just makes sense that the laws should be. My stance is the laws should be laxed for adults travelling just casually around on their bicycle. If you're going to ride your bike in a race or any sort of fast peloton, group rides in the morning, definitely wear a helmet. That's the smart thing to do, because there's been multiple occasions where I've caved in the back of my helmet from a crash and I've destroyed it. But I think just going down to the cafe, I think it should be pretty relaxed. And I think particularly closer to the CBD, it definitely should be more relaxed.
Yeah, and look, we certainly see in other places of Australia, the beach culture is a very interesting part of it. I was up at Gold Coast for Christmas last year. My parents live up there, and I spent a bit of time around Burleigh Heads, and it was just interesting to see that culture. People on cruiser bikes, shared paths, going pretty slowly on their bike, less than 10 Ks, cruising around. A lot of them weren't wearing helmets. No one seemed to care, and it all seemed to just be fine. Yeah. They weren't coming off. They're going down to the beach. They don't want a whole lot of gear when you get to the beach. They don't even have a towel. They just want to be able to get off their bike, hop in, have a quick swim. You certainly see that part of it, that it's a lifestyle thing. And when you see that, bikes become this lifestyle, and when they become a fashion item and a normal thing that just everyone does, then more people start to ride, and that's what brings that real bike culture, which is great to see.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mention the fashion side of things as well, because people are pretty, they're pretty, pretty material like that. You know, I mean, a helmet, it doesn't look pretty, you know, and so that can be the one thing that stops people getting on the bike, really, particularly like you say, going to the beach.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we see the bike fashion statement. It's quite incredible, the link actually. You know, you look at all sorts of ads and fashion ads and all sorts of things, and so often the bike is used as this sort of lifestyle prop. You see it on the top of cars. You go into a car dealership and there's a bike on the roof of the car to try and sell a car. It's kind of interesting. You never go into a bike shop and see
So true. That's happening in the last few years.
Yeah, you never see a car underneath a bike in the bike shop trying to sell a bike, but you see it this way. It's sort of this real lifestyle thing that people see a bike and they think about it. And why that is I think when it comes down to why bikes are so attractive, it equals freedom. You get on the bike and you're free and you go and you feel pretty free because you feel the wind around you and all that sort of thing. So that's why it's so attractive to people. They see a bike, they feel freedom, and people try and trade off that in fashion as well, which is a good thing because it just means people look at bikes and people have a fond memory, you know, when they think about when they rode a bike as a kid or they rode it in some special place or something like that. Like lots of people have a place where they rode a bike and they think, God, I always remember that moment. So I'm sure you've got one. Like is there some place where you went in the world where you just went, that time I rode a bike was unbelievable? Like have you got one of those?
Yeah, look, I've got multiple situations, you know, where I've travelled, particularly through Southeast Asia, and you rock up with your bike. I mean, you know, I did a couple of tours over there in Southeast Asia, and you know, you rock up with your bike, and the best way to discover a new city is to just jump on the bike and ride. But the funny thing about Asian or Southeast Asian countries or Asian countries in general is they don't have this regulation like Western countries do. And so, you know, you can just jump on your bike and ride.
Yeah,
you don't have to. If you want to wear a helmet, no one gives a shit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And this is what I like about Southeast Asia and Asian countries in general is that it is a more relaxed approach to their rules and regulations, and I find it very frustrating in Australia how, you know, you can't even cross the line. I mean, if you cross the line at a set of traffic lights, you know, that big thick white line, and put your nose over, a cop will book you $500.
Yeah, look, one thing, NT is an interesting place. I don't know if you've ever been to NT and had a look there, and we've done quite a bit of work particularly in Darwin, where they do have a partial helmet law where you don't have to wear a bike helmet on a bike path or on a footpath. And when you go there and you see it in operation, it all just happens pretty easily. And you see the police, when they see someone who, at times when they're swapping between the footpath and the bike path, and they do go on the road occasionally without a helmet on, the police just don't worry about it. You can see them just going, we've got bigger fish to fry. You know, we've got other problems, real people to worry about who are doing the wrong thing, and they just they go straight past the police. If you did that here, if you go past the police without a helmet on here, they'll pull you over and hit you with a pretty big fine.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have had situations where I've ridden down the road, like I said, go to get a coffee, and I've gone past the police, and I have found the police pretty relaxed. I mean, I've been past a number of police over my time, and they're like, they can't be bothered really. But in a lot of situations, they will pull you over. I had one cop pull me over once, and then realised I was the cycling maven, and then he watches my vlog, and he was like, "Oh no, see you later, mate. Have a good one." So that was pretty cool.
Well, it's paid for itself, hasn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, I think in general the cops are pretty relaxed. But then I'm absolutely disgusted when I see 3 or 4 cops in the city and they're lining up booking cyclists just one after the other for not having a bell on their bike or minor things like that. Or do you know those little stings they do?
Yeah, the bell things it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, what you're going to find someone for not having a bell, and people think I hear that too, and as you could probably gather, I'm fairly relaxed about it. And people think the bell's going to save you. Yeah, well, anyone that knows when you really need to brake hard, you don't have time to be stuffing around with your bell. You know. Well,
let's talk about the background. Why? Who comes to making these decisions for a start? They're clearly not cyclists, right? They're just some old fuddy-duddy, you know, who's been passed closely on a path, I reckon, and they just happen to work in a position of power. But, I often think, what's the basis? So, for example, if we talk about the bells and the helmets, what is is there any clinical evidence, or is there any evidence to show that wearing helmets in Australia, I know this was introduced in 1990, compulsory helmet laws were introduced in 1991, I think it was, or 1990?
Yeah, it was it happened at different times in different states. It's between 90 and about 92 or 3.
Yeah. And so what is the evidence? I mean, I haven't seen any. I did a few hours research yesterday, actually, and I couldn't find any papers on this.
Oh, there's a lot of papers. There's more academic papers than you would believe.
Okay.
And as part of our helmet review, we had someone do a review of the academic papers. There is an extraordinary number. It is unbelievable how much academic rigour and time and effort has been put into this. But in the end, when we reviewed it all, the thing it shows, the one clear thing it does show, which is probably no surprise, that if you do come off your bike and you do hit your head, you're better off with a helmet on than without a helmet on.
Yeah. And look, that makes sense. That is 100% a fact, right? And we all agree to that. My concern is, what is the evidence versus helmetless injuries versus sedentary lifestyle, and the people that weren't riding? I mean, has there been any comparison to that? Looking at people not riding bikes because of compulsory helmet laws and who are now suffering from diabetes and are a burden on our public health system.
There's certainly been a lot of efforts to try and do that. But look, and when we look at this burden on our public health system from physical inactivity, it's extraordinary. The number of people, like we do the basic number, and it basically works that in Australia, there's out of the whole population, 1 in 6 people are going to die as a result of not doing enough physical activity at the moment. 1 in 6.
1 in 6.
1 in 6 is going to get sick as a result of it and have a pretty unpleasant experience. So 1/3 of people are either going to, as a result of where we currently are with physical activity, either have a heart attack, type 2 diabetes, and some kinds of cancers. Colon and breast are the most affected by physical inactivity. It's extraordinary. And not a lot gets done about it in reality. When we look at this preventative health problem, we've seen physical inactivity just keep going up over the years. So it was found out in 1950, funnily enough, that physical inactivity, how bad it is for you, early 50s, by a guy called Professor Morris, who was an English professor, and he looked at people on the London buses, right? And he looked at the drivers and the conductors, and he found out that the bus driver was twice as likely to die of a heart attack as the conductor. And that's because the conductor was collecting tickets and going up all the stairs all day. Then he looked at postal workers and found out the person who's sorting the mail in the back of the post office is twice as likely to die of a heart attack as the person delivering the mail, of course, did it by bike. So that's when we found out how bad physical inactivity is for you. And we haven't really done a lot about it. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk about trying to get people to play more sport, and that hasn't tended to be terribly effective.
So as someone who's, on the ground with local government, you're obviously having conversations with them. Are we going to see, is there any promise, have they shown any promise in relaxing the helmet laws? And I keep bringing it back to helmet, but I truly believe that this is a big problem for us in Australia and the number one reason why people aren't getting on bikes. Would you agree with me on that?
I wouldn't say it's number one. I just say, to me, it's a whole bunch of things you got to put together. It's all the things that when you bring them together, places to ride, supportive laws, speed of vehicles. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to come together to really make a massive change.
Yeah. And do you see progress?
It's interesting in my job. There's times I tear my hair out and go, because, as I said, I've been at it for 11 years. Times I tear my hair out and think, we're getting nowhere. Are we moving at all? And then there's other days where I go, we've had a win. You get a win and you feel good about it, whether it's something that's going to be built or promised to be built, or a little change here, or something you managed to get rid of that was going to cause a problem. There is progress, but it's nowhere near it should be. We should be going much faster. We really should. We're still going at a bit of a snail's pace. So, there's days I feel really good about it, and there's other days I just go, where are we going? Are we getting anywhere?
Your job would be a very frustrating job. Although rewarding, it would be, when you see progress, it would be very frustrating dealing with some of these people. Because I think at the end of the day, cyclists and people who ride bikes, I don't like to name us cyclists. We're really people who just ride a bike, really. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, that's certainly the language. We're very cautious with that language because cyclists can be seen as elite and fast and intimidating for some people. Interesting, we go back to the Dutcher courses we always do, and they have two different names. They have a name for a person who's really what we'd call a cyclist, who's in Lycra on a road bike going fast. They call them a wheel runner, which is like a wheel runner. And then for people just riding bikes, they're called a fietsen. Excuse my pronunciation there. For anyone that knows Dutch, I'm sure it's appalling. You can speak Dutch. But they have two different names. But that's really because people who are cycling is seen as something that is a sporty sort of activity, and people riding bikes is just people in normal clothes who hop on a bike and ride around, whether it's to the cafe, the beach, the shops, to school, to work, whatever they might be doing.
Yeah. There is a distinction there, isn't there, between the two? And like I was just saying, we are a minority, really. I mean, and I think, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but this is partly the reason we get bullied. I mean, we can't ride on the road because people get fed up with us on the road and they want to run us over. And then you jump on the footpath or a shared path and you get abused by old people and, people walking on the footpath. So not that I've got anything against old people. What I'm saying is, it's a problem. It does not matter where we ride our bicycles, we're being hammered by somebody. And I often think about this, being the minority, feeling like a minority, is probably why. I mean, okay, let's be straight up here. They talk about black people. They say a black man went in and robbed in the States. You see the report comes there. A black man went in and robbed the bank or the store. It's always a label, and the same thing goes with cyclists. A cyclist was hit, or a cyclist did this, and we're sort of pulled into this group. And one thing I find frustrating is when a cyclist runs a red light, we're all tarnished as a group by that guy's bad behaviour. Yet you see someone driving a car run a red light, we don't tarnish the whole drivers with this same poor label. Do you sort of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, and I know we're trying to do a lot of work with the media actually in that regard, and I know I wrote something about it the other day when I kind of reached my wit's end with them when we're saying to them, it's not a cyclist, this is a person, and particularly it comes around when there's a terrible tragedy and they talk about a cyclist, and we see it as dehumanising in many ways, but also, one, it can dehumanise a person, but as you say, the other thing it can do, and I do toy with this a bit, and it does worry me that, in the past, I guess I say people have always struggled with with discrimination. People are always looking over a long time to say, who's worse than me, so I feel better about myself. And it used to be about religion and race and whether it's the colour of your skin or where you came from or something. And now it's because we've pretty much worked out largely, look, that's an appalling way to behave. It spills into other areas, and it can be now by what activities people have, whether they're riding a bike. So suddenly you get this group of people say, I hate people that ride a bike. I hate people who are cyclists. And you think, why would you hate people who are cyclists? It's just crazy. It's a irrational way, but it's just someone who is looking, I think, to say, hey, I'm better than them. And it's a very unpleasant part of human nature.
Well, again, yeah, I do agree with you, and I think they are the majority. So it's the majority against the minority, and no one wants to be part of the minority, and I think that's a big part of it.
Well, I actually have a different view here.
Okay.
I actually think a lot of people on bikes want to be part of the minority, in that it's sort of seen as, hey, this is a special thing, and I know this, and I've got a little niche activity here. So, sometimes I do think that our bike riding world can hold itself back a little bit because some of the strongest supporters of it are actually kind of worried that, hey, if everyone rides a bike, I won't be special anymore. Which is sort of interesting because it's good a lot of people like to have be special because they have something that other people look at and go, you do what? That's absolutely incredible. What, you ride your bike to work? And people shake their head and they feel good about that because they're a bit standing out on their own. Where if everyone did it, you wouldn't feel that special about it. If you said, like if you're in some of those places where over half the people ride their bike to work and you went, I ride my bike to work, people would go, oh, what's the big deal? It's sort of like saying, drink a glass of water. When a lot of places, when you say, I ride my bike to work, everyone looks at you and goes, you did what? You rode from Oakley to the city? Oh my God, that's unbelievable. You know, in some people's minds, that's seen as, you know, going up Mount Everest or something.
Yeah, you're right. I suppose you're right. It is. There is that, you know, that segment of people who are always going to want to be part of that little group. So just finishing up on what we were talking about with the helmet laws. You recently did a survey, 28,000. Was it 20,000?
Yeah, just under 20,000 people responded, which is 10 times what we've had to any other survey.
Yeah, so you did a survey. Really, the survey was to ask Victorians.
No, it was actually open to anyone, anywhere in the world, but it was Australians. We didn't get a lot of people from overseas, but it was throughout Australia, spread widely throughout Australia.
Okay, and the question was, what do you think mandatory helmet laws should be abolished?
Yep.
And 58% said there should be a change to helmet laws.
Correct.
41% said helmets should be mandatory at all times. 41% said mandatory. So I'm thinking a lot of those people weren't cyclists.
No, the vast majority of people that responded ride their bikes. We didn't get a lot of response from people who aren't bike riders.
Yeah, 40% said helmets should be only mandatory when the risk is high, which is pretty much where I stand.
Yep.
30% said they would ride more often if helmets weren't mandatory.
Yep.
So that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. It's
So
very interesting.
So 30% of 20,000. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, and the thing that worries, particularly the authorities or particularly like the trauma type health people. The other interesting part is when we said to people would you never wear a helmet? It was a very small proportion of people said they would never wear a helmet. So a lot of them said they would still. Bike riders feel they're able to assess the risk themselves and say, okay, I'm going down to the cafe, I'll be fine, I'll go at a low speed, but I'm going out for a training ride and I'm going to descend down a mountain. They're going to stick a helmet on.
Yeah, and that's just common sense, really, isn't it?
It is. And what we do know, though, of course, is the biggest risk when it comes to riding your bike is from vehicles. The biggest risk is being hit by a vehicle. 80% of bike crashes happen because a person driving a car hits a person riding a bike.
Now, I want to challenge you on that. Because 80% is a lot, right? Is there any evidence there with that?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, there is.
Because, I'm thinking, look, I'm an experienced cyclist. So this is an interesting topic in itself, right? Because I'm an experienced cyclist and I know that when I'm riding down a path and there's cars on the left-hand side, I know there's probably a chance someone's going to open their door. And I don't really hold, dooring's a big problem and we'll cover that in a little while. But I also know just to stay out to the right a little bit, right? And I think my point that I'm getting at is with cycling experience comes a little bit more knowledge on how to stay upright. And I think a lot of these people, it's not necessarily always the car drivers and the vehicle drivers' fault. I think a lot of the time there's some confusion as to who's going to go left and a lot of these people I see just doing stupid things, riding too close to cars when they're passing them at parked cars. Do you think? And I mean, a lot of these crashes are just people falling off as well, inexperienced bike riders. Do you really think it's 80%?
Yeah, it's been shown around the world, lots of places. Yeah, I know. It's staggering, isn't it? Like it's
80% of accidents involve a car. That's crazy,
and it's the driver's fault. 80% of the crashes, it's the fault of a person.
So what's your take on what I just said about cyclists and just mate? We're on the Talking Cheng podcast here. I'm going to be straight up with you. There's a lot of bunters out there. There's a lot of absolute, they're not real crash hot on bikes. And I see these people riding and I almost want to go up to them and say, hey, mate, you can't do that because you're going to fall off and crash. I question really whether it is the car driver's fault in a lot of these situations.
Look, it's interesting when you say about people and their skill on the bike. There's no problem with having poor skill on the bike. I don't believe, as long as you're not doing something that's above your sort of say, above your pay grade, that's when the real problem is. And I reckon I've seen that in the last 10 or 11 years I've now been working in bike riding. I've seen people, what I call, progress so quickly through the stages. They've been barely riding, they've ridden a little bit as a kid, and then particularly, it tends to be, unfortunately, a lot of people like me who are men in this age bracket, we're 40 plus tax, they get a bike and pretty quickly they're doing some pretty extraordinary things on it. They're riding in a bunch, they're descending at speed, and that's something that they're doing after 3 or 4 years, or even sometimes 2 or 3. They get a bike and they're on beach road in no time, riding in a pack. It does take time to build those skills, and as you say, you do build them over time. And I think it's one of these, particularly from that sporting thing, where people have gone very, very quickly from 0 to 100, when in other things you just don't go that quickly from 0 to 100.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things where you learn as you go. You see a lot of these novices in bunches, and it's a place that, as an experienced cyclist, you want to avoid, because I see a lot of crashes in the bunches from people just doing silly things. Which is basically a lack of experience. But when I relate this specifically to, say, dooring, for example, so let's talk about dooring. So the definition of dooring is a parked car,
yep,
and someone either getting in or out of their car, opening their door on a cyclist who's passing in the bike lane. Is that fair to say?
Fair enough.
And did the Bicycle Network coin this phrase, dooring?
I would like to think we did, but I can't imagine we did.
Okay, so it's obviously a worldwide problem. For a start, it's, I suppose, from an infrastructure, if you're an infrastructure planner setting out a road, it is difficult to utilise enough space across the road so as to put people the ability to park their cars, also put a bike lane in, and then put a couple of lanes of traffic in and still have enough space to fit everything. Are you interacting with the government on this?
Yeah, and it's not really difficult. I know, so we go back to this overseas, people from overseas come and they scratch their head and they go, why do you have the bike riders protecting the cars? Why don't you have the bike riders on the inside of the cars? It's just the classic way you should build the road. It should go pedestrians, bikes, if you have space, park cars moving. There's no way you should have, but we've got a lot of situations here where we've gone pedestrians, parked cars, bikes, moving cars. We've just got it the wrong way around.
And when you say this is an interesting point, because I often think about this as I'm riding along and I'm thinking this is the most ridiculous setup I've ever seen of a bike path on a road. And then I think, who is the person or the people or the team that are putting this together when they do it? And who is it?
It's a bunch of people. I mean, it could be someone from Vic Roads in Victoria, or it could be someone from the council. So, we do have a situation where there's a lot of people and a lot of traffic engineering type people who are involved with this. There's a big spread of them. There's a huge number. And I know we've done work here to try and produce best practice guides, and we're back going to have another go at it and try and do more so that it's clear. Here's the few situations we should do. And it is difficult because there are lots of different road situations, but we should have a few that we know this is what we're aiming for. And when it comes to dooring, we do know that dooring, particularly in Melbourne, comes down to about 4 or 5 key streets where all the dooring happens. Chapel Street, Sydney Road, Gertrude Street, which I ride down every day. There's these few streets where the vast majority of the dooring happens. And on some of those streets is the ones we've seen the terrible tragedies as a result of dooring. We saw a terrible one with Alberto Paulin on Sydney Road, a terrible one with James Cross on Glenfrey Road. The dooring is confined to a few key streets, so we could make a massive hole in the number of doorings just by fixing those key streets, which is what we're working on. St Kilda Road's another classic one.
So how do you fix a dooring incident? You've got, let's look at the circumstances. Mum's in a hurry, pulls her car over. She's running late to pick the kids up from school, just frantic, gets out of the car. And a cyclist comes past. So, so we've obviously got the mum that we have to sort out. What about the cyclist? Does the cyclist have a responsibility
Look, I think you do when you're riding your bike, and you should be conscious. And you mentioned you're conscious of where you position yourself, so you're not too close to the cars. Sometimes it does get tight, though. Like I mentioned, some of those streets where really you are pretty squeezed. And I know personally myself, and I don't think I'm the world expert on bike technique, but the bits where I know I'm in a pretty tight place and it's hard for me to ride outside the dooring zone, I'm going at an incredible slow pace, and I'm really keeping my eye out what's coming in front of me. So I'm thinking I should be able to stop. But as I say, the best thing we need to be able to do is we get the car on these, get the bike, on the inside of the parked cars. It will make a massive difference. That will certainly help. But there's other technologies for other areas that have been coming in for vehicles as well. There's some cars now that have technologies that do have a driver alert system. One, so you can't open the door if they detect the bike rider coming and the door stops you opening it for the time it takes, which is great. We should get that stuff fitted to vehicles as well as teaching people what's called the Dutch reach, which is basically if you're in your vehicle, you open the door with your left hand, so then you look over your shoulder and you see the bike rider coming as well. So there's things we need to do to improve the situation for everyone.
Yeah, I noticed the in the city actually coming past St. Vincent's. I'm not exactly sure the name of the street, but they have changed it a couple of spots in the city where they've put the bike lane on the inside.
Yep.
But then I sort of think, well, what about the passenger door opening? But I suppose every car's got a driver, so you're going to have more people opening the driver's side door, and not every car has a passenger getting out of the vehicle. So there's obviously you limit your chances of being doored there as well.
Yeah, the average number of people in a car is like 1.1 or 1.2.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. The vast majority of vehicles have one person in them.
That's incredible in itself.
It is incredible. And so what makes them, as you say, there could be a passenger situation, but it's incredibly rare.
So this is a situation where I think a lot of people don't like carpooling simply because people don't like people. People just don't like people. I mean, I've got to admit, me personally, I'd rather just chill out on my own on the couch watching TV than go to a party, for example. And I think people just like to be in their car, listen to their podcast, listen to their music, and have their little solitude as they're on their miserable way to their miserable job. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is you can do that on the bike. You could just put your headphones in and ride your bike, and
yeah, carpooling's interesting. It's never really worked. It's the timing thing too for a lot of people. Like, maybe in the old days when you worked in one of those, sort of sterile environments where everyone knocked off at 4:45 and you all left at 4:45 and you all got there at exactly the same time. But it just doesn't work. You're waiting for your person who's leaving earlier, leaving later. You're waiting for your neighbour. It just doesn't happen. That's the great thing about the bike too. You have complete control over your time. I know when it comes to, commuting on the bike, the variation in my commute on the bike, 1-2 minutes max, I know exactly how long it takes, and it takes the exact same amount of time. And if I try and pedal harder occasionally or get a good tailwind, it hardly makes any difference at all. You control the time perfectly. If you're on a train, hot day in Melbourne, it goes to pot and suddenly you're 45 minutes late in your car, something happens, there's a crash or something. Suddenly it takes another 40 minutes to get home. It just doesn't happen on the bike.
Yeah.
Unless maybe you get a puncture.
Yeah, and what do you do? Well, that's true. That's a big thing. I think most people don't even know how to fix a puncture. Most new cyclists. So I've seen a lot of people standing on the side of the road after getting a puncture. What do you do on the crappy days through winter?
What do I do?
Yeah.
There's not many. Suck it up.
Suck it up.
I reckon, as I say, in a year, how many times do I either get home or get to work when I'm absolutely soaking wet? 1, 2 a year. Not many. Wouldn't be 10.
Yeah.
And in the cold, well, I just put on lots of clothes. I'm a real wimp. I personally feel the cold badly, but I just put on lots of clothes. Beanie under the helmet sounds pretty horrific, but beanie under the helmet, decent gloves, more jackets, off you go.
And so you live a fair way out of in the suburbs. That's a long commute.
I don't go the whole way. I do halfway. Because I live out. My commute is about 24 kilometres by what I'd call hardcore road, which is going on the most challenging roads with the most vehicles, or you can go pretty much the whole Yarra Trail, but that's up to 40-something kilometres.
Yeah.
So, I go halfway.
Now, this is the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. You know, you're talking about the Yarra Trail and the fact that it's not a straight line, right? It's a lot of curving and then I look at the train. So at the moment in Victoria, they are rolling out, the Andrews government are rolling out this rail crossings where they're removing the railway crossings and they're putting overhead trains in a nutshell. And so I think, okay, this is a fantastic opportunity to integrate the cycling lane with the overhead, so to put the whole thing overhead together so that people can ride in a straight line. And a lot of these governments, a lot of these councils, they don't understand the basic concept of a cyclist commuting to work. When you're going to and from work, you want to go in a straight line. You don't want to zigzag and turn left and turn right and stop at. Am I onto something here?
Yeah, we're seeing that changing. London's done a great job. They call them in London the cycling superhighways. And we've got plans to build more of those, particularly in Melbourne too. This is times when you realise that this particular piece of a place to ride is about getting from A to B. It's not about stopping and meandering around the whole way. With the sky rails that have been built though, the ones that have been done best have had the bikes on the ground rather than up in the air, mainly because it's just too hard to get bikes up and down all the time on the sky rail. But, you know, I agree at times they put lots of curves in, and if you're just trying to get into the city, you know, you do want to be able to put your head down, pedal off into the city.
Yeah. I suppose I'm not really necessarily talking about a sky rail, but what I am talking about is, for example, down here at the end of Glenferrie Road, where you turn left onto the bike path, you know, you literally from the road you cycle on the bike path, but the bike path is suspended from the bridge, so you're not on the ground. It's just a suspended thing above. And when I look at the Maribyrnong rail crossing project, they could have done that. They've got the trains high above the ground, so cyclists could have sort of ridden up gradually up onto the same sort of level, and then ridden in a straight line with the train.
Yeah.
But instead, what they've done is they've kept it on the ground. They've put zigzags in, and it's almost like a zigzag course that you're riding, and plus you've got to stop at every second set of traffic lights. It's like you might as well just ride on the road. It's much quicker. And I think what they've done is they've had this mindset that, we're just going to get mums and dads with their kids riding, but they're not taking into account the commuter. Yeah,
we're going to see the first one, which will happen as part of the Westgate project. So the new Western road that's happening. There's some pretty interesting plans for there, and we will see there a commuter type bike route that is actually elevated. It's about
that's good.
3 to 4 kilometres, I think. And that's been recognised that to try and get through that whole area, which is in that western part of Melbourne, there's a lot of commuters actually come into the city from the western part, more than people realise. But you've got to go through the docks area. There's a lot of truck movements through there, not a very hospitable place to ride if you're on your bike. So that's going to be a good way to get the bikes away from particularly the truck movements, in which we have, again, seen 1 or 2 terrible tragedies through that area.
Yeah, it is. In the western side of Melbourne is a big truck problem, really, isn't it? That they go through that suburban area of Footscray and Yarraville and stuff, and there is so many trucks going out through there.
Yeah, there is. The docks is a terrible area, and trucks and bikes do not mix. It's a terrible situation, and any time that happens, and we've done we're doing a lot of work and a lot of campaigning to try and improve that situation, particularly as Melbourne and most of Australian cities are going through a real build boom. They're building lots of key pieces of infrastructure, roads, tunnels underground for railways. So the truck movements are going up substantially as a result of that, and will over the next 10 years as we try and cater for the population as it really increases. So with all those truck movements, we need to do a lot of work to make sure that people on bikes and people on foot are well protected from the trucks.
Yeah. Obviously the thing is with trucks is it's very difficult as a driver. I always like to put myself in the other person's situation. As a cyclist, as someone cycling, I look at mum running late for school and she's panicked, and I see this, I can understand her situation as well when she flings open the door and sort of jumps out. And then I look at truck drivers and I think it must be very difficult to look in the rear view mirror or the side mirrors and keep an eye out for cyclists and it's not an excuse. You still have responsibilities, but I do see the difficulties in it
We're running this program at the moment called Swapping Seats, which is where we're getting bike riders to see it from the truck driver's perspective and truck drivers to see it from the bike rider's perspective. And when you sit up in the cab of a big truck and you see just how poor the visibility is, it is extraordinary. They can see very, very little. One of the best things we can do for trucks, and it's obviously a long time coming, is get low cab trucks. It improves the visibility substantially for truck drivers. But with the trucks we currently have, we really want to make sure that, one, the truck drivers understand that bike riders could be there, but also bike riders understand truck drivers' visibility is very poor, and be very careful anywhere you're around a truck, because you might think they can see you, whether you're at the front of the truck, particularly on the left-hand side of a truck. Often they cannot see you at all.
Yeah, that's so true. And, I don't know. I did the 2017 Indy Pack, and so I had a lot of experience with the trucks overtaking me out on the outback. Mm-hmm. And the trucks were pretty good. The truck drivers were fantastic. They always, at every opportunity, they overtook me on the opposite side of the road. They'd give me plenty of room. And they were fantastic. The place where they had difficulty is obviously if they've got an oncoming truck and they're going in the opposite directions and they're overtaking at the same time. Cyclists need to understand that they need to get off the road in that situation. So if there's a truck coming in the opposite direction and a truck coming from behind, it's very difficult for those two trucks to coordinate a slow down so that they don't pass at the exact moment that they're passing the cyclist. And so I think in those situations, if you're out in the open road, you really need to get off the road.
Yeah, and particularly in the urban environments, left-turning trucks, they're the thing we're saying to everyone. Be so careful being on the inside of a truck turning left. Yep. It's such a interesting situation. The trucks often move out into the middle lane to turn left because they're allowed to, and two, they need to get around. And if you're on a bike, you might think, oh, beauty, this truck's gone slightly right, so it's going straight ahead. But often they will turn left. So anytime, particularly at an intersection, you see a truck, be very cautious about what we call underpassing it, which means going past the truck on the left-hand side.
So true. Yeah, that's definitely a big danger. Do you know one thing about trucks and cars when they're passing you, and obviously we see the Amy Gillett Foundation, which is another bicycle advocacy group who are propagating A Metre Matters, which is to say that, give cyclists at least a metre or 1.5 metres of room. I don't know if that's necessarily the answer, because I think that presents problems in its own right, and we'll discuss that. But I think one thing that I always think of is when trucks and cars are passing me in a potentially dangerous situation, why don't they just slow down? Why don't we have a joint metre matters sort of philosophy, but in a slow down philosophy? Like, why don't you just slow down? Like if I see a mum with a pram and I'm driving down a 60k an hour road, I'm probably going to slow down to 30k an hour just in case she steps out in front of me.
Yeah, look, it would be wonderful. Unfortunately, I think so many people are always late and stressed, and they always think they have to go fast. But as you say, the speed makes a massive difference. If there does happen to be a crash, the speed a vehicle is going, the difference it makes is huge. There's basic numbers you run, which basically says you get hit by a car at 60 kilometres an hour, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of surviving. At 40 kilometres, it's a 5 in 10 chance of surviving. At 30 kilometres, it's a 9 in 10 chance of surviving. So whenever we argue all the time for getting speed limits down, get the speed limits lower, it makes a massive difference, one, to people's comfort level so they ride more, but also if something does go wrong, there's a real difference. But, we still we hear huge opposition to this. When there's a trial for a 40 kilometre speed limit or a 30 kilometre speed limit, people lose their minds and go, oh my God, what's it going to do to my day? It's going to be ruined. And the reality is people around the cities are not driving that fast anyway. In peak hour, their average speed is much lower than that in any event, but it does cause a lot of political wrangling. But it will make a massive difference to get the speed lower. And if people just adopted that practice when they see someone go, oh, I better be a bit careful there. And you should do that because it's a basic human thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I get older, I sort of, I see situations where I can potentially see a dangerous situation with a cyclist on the road, and then I just slow my down. So there you go. If you want your next slogan for the Bicycle Network, I reckon it should be just slow down. Just slow down.
Should there be a expletive in the middle of that or no?
I don't know.
Maybe an adjective of some sort or something.
Yeah, I don't know how well that'll go, but talking about big vehicles, there was a bus driver who drove into a low bridge in Melbourne. He seriously injured 6 passengers on board. So his bus was taller; it was 3.8 metres, and he went under a 3-metre bridge. He was travelling at the normal speed, didn't slow down, didn't even take into account the fact that the bridge was lower than the thing, and injured 6 passengers. Now, this was 2.5 years ago. The court case was on last week. His name was Jack Aston, and he went to jail. He got sentenced to 6 years, and so he's going to do 2.5 years in jail. Now, I look at this, and I think the guy didn't kill anyone. He hurt a lot of people. Clearly, it was openly stated that it was just an oversight on his part, and it was obviously criminal negligence he got charged for. And yet we've had 6 people die this year on bikes, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the drivers didn't get charged. And I think we're seeing a lot of drivers who are, they're getting charged, but they're not getting thrown in jail. I don't see many people who kill cyclists being thrown in jail. What's your thoughts?
Oh, look, there are. Unfortunately, one part of my work is we do have involvement and we do watch those cases pretty carefully. Obviously, not all situations end up with the person driving a car who ends up being charged, but there are. There's been a few terrible ones, and situations where there's been some pretty stiff penalties over the past few years. And some, unfortunately, a couple have been our members who have been lost on the roads, and the penalties there. I know one of our members, his name's Julian Paul, was killed by a woman called Stephanie Marr, and she was found guilty of culpable driving, which is the most serious offence. And initially, she got a 12-year sentence. It was reduced on appeal, but she got a 12-year sentence.
So what did she do?
She came under the category of being sleep deprived. Reality, there was some unclarity about her situation, whether she'd been taking drugs or not. When she unfortunately killed Julian, she then left the scene, hid the car, went into hiding. So by the time they got her, it was hard to test her for drugs, but it found she'd been awake for an extraordinarily long period of time. And as a result of that, she got a significant penalty. She pleaded not guilty. So as a result of that, you get no free kicks on the way through. You get no reduction in your penalty if you plead not guilty. So she got a very significant penalty. And there was another one, one of our dear members called Gordon Ibbs, who was killed by a fellow called Bradley Azzopardi, and he got a significant sentence as well. I can't remember exactly, but it was 8 or 9 years for dangerous driving, causing death. So it does happen. We probably see 1 or 2 of those cases go through the court a year. We saw another woman, Rebecca Stewart, who the person in this occasion, Christian Aspey, he wasn't killed, but he was very seriously injured. She got a significant penalty as well, and she was heavily drug affected. He was out on an early morning training ride around Lake Wendouree in Ballarat. So there are the penalties there. It does happen. But occasionally there's obviously situations when the authorities have a job to do there, and it is difficult. They do the best they can. I think they do a terrific job making those investigations, because they are difficult and emotive. And what I do say about these situations is there's no winners here. It's a terrible situation, for the family who've had to endure loss of the loved one. Their pain is often extraordinary and ongoing for a long period of time. But on the other token, for the person behind the wheel who's done something, whether it's and often it is pretty serious criminal behaviour, whether they're on drugs, drinking, sleep deprived, texting is a really big one, their life is in a hell of a mess. They're off to jail, so it's a pretty serious situation.
Yeah, I mean it is terrible for all parties, because at the end of the day, I'm a cyclist, and I've been guilty of doing something on the phone when I should be really paying attention to the road myself. So I'm going to put my hand up, and I think there's a lot of people who could probably do the same thing. And then to suddenly find yourself in that situation where you've, killed someone or injured someone, it's such a silly mistake.
It is, and it can happen fairly quickly, and the phone is a terrible temptation for people. It's this wonderful device that does all these amazing things for us, but it's like a drug. It's hard to put it away. It's hard to put it down. We've been having a very good chat here, which is fantastic, and neither of us have looked at our phones for I don't know how long we've been talking. It's pretty refreshing, but for most people in life, it's sort of like, 3 minutes, I need another hit of my phone, and for whatever reason. So yeah, it's in the phone in the vehicle is a terrible situation.
And this leads me to the next thing. These phone companies should be held accountable for people. I mean, look, at the end of the day, people using their phones in their vehicles is a big problem. And so rather than putting that fingerprint scanner on the next phone, on the next iPhone 11, maybe they should put set something up in the software where as soon as you enter your car, the phone goes into no use mode.
Yeah, look, we suggested that in the middle of last year. We came out and said all phones should have blocking technology so that once you get in the car, they don't work. Front page of the paper. Yep. People went crazy. You're crazy. This is incredible. What are you thinking? The technology exists. There's lots of different technology companies who all approach us afterwards and said, will you back our product? Will you back our product? But when we suggested it, people came out with all the, of course I call them the what ifs. Well, what if, you're on the way to the hospital and your wife's about to have a baby and you need to use your phone? What if all these extreme situations? And we're just like, we'll just pull over and make a call. So we did suggest mobile phone blocking technology, and it caused a hell of a stink. But it was good fun because, seriously, it's a real problem and we should just be able to hold it together.
Yeah, I think maybe this is very similar to mandatory helmet laws and mandatory seatbelt laws and things. So maybe what the companies could do, like Apple, for example, is to roll out a voluntary button that you press where you can disable your phone. There is, at the end of the day, there is airplane mode, but it's airplane mode, right? So people think, I can only use that when I get on a plane. So, driving mode. Mm-hmm. So there could be a button where, and people can voluntarily do it. They can put their car and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. There's more that needs to be done in that area because the distraction is huge, and it's significant. What it does, people take their eyes off the road, and there was a case which was recently went through the courts again where a woman took her eyes off the road, and she said she wasn't using a phone, but she was connecting the Bluetooth for the music. She said 10 seconds. Eyes off the road for 10 seconds.
10 seconds is a long time.
You count to 10. One day, sit in your car when it's not going, count to 10. It's incredible how far you go. It's amazing.
Well, especially when you're doing 100k an hour.
I know. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a big problem. There's some new laws that have been introduced into Victoria in July 2017 talking about phones. Can you explain was there some sort of liaison? Was there some sort of trade-off here? What was happening here when these laws were introduced? Who was communicating, advising? Was it you guys?
Well, you've actually got me. What are the laws?
Well, so in July 2017, there was So there was all these new laws introduced for cyclists. So you're not allowed to touch your phone on the bike, and if you even touch your phone while you're riding a bicycle, you get a $467 fine, which is the equivalent to what drivers get when they're talking on their phones.
Yeah,
which is fair enough. But if you have it in a quad lock mount or some sort of mount on your bicycle and you don't touch it, you're allowed to use your phone.
Yep.
So that was one of the laws. There was a few other laws. There was one, you're allowed to now ride in the bus lane.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I do remember these ones. Yeah.
That was the other one.
Yep.
So in Victoria, you weren't allowed to. And so you were riding in these bus lanes back in the day and you'd have these buses absolutely going off at you, which I think is just stupid. You should be able to ride in the bus lane.
Bus lane, I've mixed views about that. Look, in some ways, I do understand it, but putting buses and bikes together, it's not the best solution. We've got whatever a bus weighs, 10 tonnes or something. It's enormous. As a way to say we're going to solve places to ride, we're going to let bikes go in the bus lane. It's a pretty poor way to treat bikes, I think. To say, yeah, you can now ride amongst the buses. It's a pretty frightening piece of equipment to ride amongst, but I get there's less traffic in the bus lane than elsewhere, so it's trying to maximise use of the space, but we shouldn't use that as an excuse for building better places to ride.
That is true. I think I'm specifically thinking about Punt Road. Punt Roads should be renamed to another word because it is such a very busy road in Melbourne. But Punt Road has a very big bus lane on the far left-hand side, and then you've got your 3 or 4 lanes of traffic. And what they were expecting you to do prior is to ride on the right of the bus lane in the traffic, and so have buses shooting up your left while you've got cars shooting down your right, and that's just completely impractical and unsafe. And so to get over in that bus lane now is a big thing. But so the bicycle network in Australia is nationwide. It looks after Victoria. Obviously there's a big move in Tasmania. I see a lot of social media coming out of Bicycle Network Tasmania. There are other bicycle advocacy groups. So there's the Amy Gillett Foundation, and they are big. They really coined the phrase "a metre matters" or 1.5 metre matters. What's the Bicycle Network's stance on that? And do you guys get along, or do you collab?
Geez, I'd like to. I'd say. It's kind of, you hear me sigh. I go, yes, sometimes the bike groups get along, sometimes they don't. I do think it's a problem. If we're going to move bike riding forward, we really do need bike people to work better together. It's not a highly collaborative world, which is really disappointing. I think about other worlds I've worked in. I used to work in footy, and I used to work at a footy club. I used to work at Carlton Footy Club. And my equivalents at other clubs were my friends and colleagues, and we chat and speak, and obviously we competed for things, but you would think Carlton and Collingwood Footy Club, Carlton and Essendon supposedly hate each other, but I could bring my equivalent at those clubs and talk to them at any time and have a very open and friendly chat. It's not that easy in bikes. People in bikes seem to me, there's a lot of history. I've been 11 years and I find out things every day. Oh, this person doesn't like you because of something that happened 25 years ago, and I'm like, it spins my mind. But I find out about it from time to time, and we try and build the bridges as best we can and say, hey, let's do things together. And we've been as guilty as anyone. We talk about the AGF's campaign. At the start, organisation, we didn't support it, minimum passing distance. We were supportive of the existing law. And I think we made a mistake there. And we've come out and said we've made a mistake, and we're now on board with it, and we're doing as best we can to try and make sure we get the law through. It would be great if it was uniform throughout Australia. It's still a bit messy. And then also make sure that on the back of it too, we have a good enforcement and education program, because we've certainly seen that in, there's a place in England, in the West Midlands, where the police have done an amazing job of really making sure that there's a significant impact. So we've come out and said that, but people still don't forgive you. They don't forgive you easily. And I would have someone every day come up to me and say, you don't support the minimum passing distance law. And I say, yeah, we do. And they go, well, you haven't done it forever, so I'm never forgiving you. I'm like, oh, okay, well, look, we thought we put our hand up. We said we made a blue. We've tried to fix it. But yeah, it sits ingrained for a long time in bikes. Bike riders are like elephants, have long memories.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And this is one of the things about the cycling world that's frustrated me for a long time, is that people have got their own silos, and what we need to do is collaborate more. We all need to just get together and for the betterment of, for our safety.
Yeah, which is really where we've tried to get through by saying, I keep saying there's no silver bullet. It's all these bits put together that matters. And people often have a single issue that's very important to them and very dear to their heart. And what I think when someone says, well, that's not the most important thing, what they hear is that doesn't matter. When really I'm trying to get to more and saying, hey, people in bikes, let's all come together, and we all have different views, but in the end, we're all trying to get to the same end goal here. We're all trying to make sure, one, more people ride bikes, and two, when you are riding a bike, we're all much better off. So we've got the same end goal here, and we're just trying to get to it through slightly different ways, but let's work on what we agree on, not what we disagree on. But yeah. I've been at it for 10 or 11 years, and I don't think I'm some days it's another one of those days where I go, I don't think I'm any closer to solving that problem.
Yeah. So you do. So just to summarise, you do support the Meter Matters.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we've supported minimum passing distance now for it'd be 3 or 4 years. We changed our position on that one, and Victoria is the one state at the moment that doesn't have a minimum passing distance law, and we just needs to get on with it. Any situation where Australia has different laws all over the place, it's pretty messy, and Victoria just needs to get on with it. And then also, as we say, back it up with a good enforcement and education program as well.
Okay, so why aren't they getting on with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. If I boiled it down, I would say the reality is the current government has seen bike riding as a way to lose votes. That's what I think. They listen to what I call the loud minority. And there's a loud minority of people who say, bloody cyclists, bike riders are a pain, get them off the road. They're very loud about it, and that's what I think the government hears. Bike riders generally are fairly quiet. We call them the quiet minority, and we need more bike riders the quiet majority, I should say, because there's a majority of people who do ride bikes. When we ask the number of people, how often do you ride a bike? It's a huge proportion of the population who ride once a year or once a month. Not a huge proportion who ride every day, but there are a huge proportion of people who do sit on a bike at some stage during the year. And what we're really trying to do is get this quiet majority to stand up and say, no, this is important, and say to the government, if you bring these laws in that are supportive of bike riding, you won't lose votes over this. You'll actually win votes. And things will be better for you and better for everyone else. And that's been the big challenge, I think.
Yeah. We've just recently had the Andrews government re-elected. What is the Andrews government like towards cyclists? And is the alternative better?
We haven't seen a lot from the Andrews government, unfortunately. We certainly saw in the election campaign a couple of little things here and there. They spoke about doing St Kilda Road, which has been on the cards for a long time though. A couple of, better pass up in the northern parts of Melbourne, but not a lot. So it's really the time now the Andrews government now obviously has a pretty clear position. They got re-elected by a landslide in effect, what you would say. So now's their chance to make these brave decisions. If they feel they're going to have a few people annoyed because they do a few things for bike riders, it won't matter. They've got enough of a buffer to take these chances. And over the next 4 years, it's really time for the Andrews government to stand up and say, we know this is part of the future. We know it has to be part of the future. We know people want this, so we need to make things better for bike riders.
Yeah, and you're talking mainly infrastructure, helmet laws, things like that.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of things. It's, as we say, it's safe places to ride. It's supportive laws for bike riders. It's speed reductions. There's a whole number of things we need to do to make us turn us into a place where lots of people ride their bikes.
Talking about safe places to ride, there's a lot of urban little velodromes out in the burbs of Melbourne. There's the Brunswick Velodrome, which has just been refurbished. I think it was the Brunswick Velodrome. Yep. But there's one out at Noble Park that at the moment we've got the local council trying to demolish it.
Yep.
And they want to put soccer grounds.
Yep.
What's the Bicycle Network's take on that?
Yeah, look, that's any time you're taking away pieces of bike places to ride, it's a bad thing. And we've certainly come out and said, no, you shouldn't do this. Now, I do understand that all our councils, they're under pressure for leisure facilities. They can't get enough soccer fields, enough football fields, basketball courts and all that sort of stuff. But it shouldn't come at the expense of bike riding. And, these velodromes are historical things. They have a lot of interest in them, and they're a great place for people who are learning to ride. They're not just a thing for people who are elite doing track bike riding. This is a place for kids to come. If you're going to learn to ride a bike for the first time, we all traditionally learn somewhere, usually down the local school is where people get taken. But if you're in that area, that's another good place for people to come and learn to ride. So look, that's an unfortunate situation. And I'd like to think that fight's not over and that's going to stay. But it looks a bit grim. And you'd like to think the council, though, work out that, no, this is a good thing and people riding bikes is important.
As I said to you earlier, I like to look at all the sides of the story. So looking at the cyclist perspective, cyclists haven't been riding on that Noble Park Velodrome because it's absolutely deteriorated. There's cracks in it, there's lumps and bumps in it to the point where it's unrideable.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously when the council says no one's been riding on it, there's good reason for it because it hasn't been maintained. But the other side of the story is I can totally understand that they want to put more soccer grounds and things that the local community are probably going to use more of. Mm-hmm. So there is those two sides of the story. I think what they need is just decent education in, once you put a velodrome in the centre of the velodrome, you could actually utilise that as a BMX track or even a cyclocross track.
Yep.
And so I think they really need someone to go in there at the next meeting and say, look, this is what could be done. You could do the soccer grounds or you could do this and utilise that area effectively.
Yeah. And you talk about the quality of the track. You look at what they did with Brunswick. Like, that's an amazing facility. Like, it's incredible. And you see, you build something that people want to use and they'll go and they'll use it. So, but if you don't maintain it and let it go into poor disrepair, well, and then say, well, no one's riding on it. Well, of course they're not riding on it if it's in disrepair.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So just finishing up, obviously Vic Roads, and there's a lot of, I've actually, just going back to what we were talking about the number of bicycle advocacy groups, sort of, there's, Amy's Bicycle Network. Who else have we got on the big players?
Well, obviously Cycling Australia is a big player in terms of, when we talk about we look at the number of members a little bit too. There's sort of Cycling, roughly Bicycle Network, we've got just under 50,000 members. Cycling Australia about 25. Bike Queensland is a big organisation. They've got about 19,000 members. They're the third biggest in terms of member base. So they tend to be the one. But then we have a lot of advocates who speak on behalf of bike issues, on various issues, and that could be a single issue, or it could be one that is doing lots of things as well. So there's lots of people in this world.
So obviously Cycling Australia, they're focusing on getting Olympians. That's how they get their funding, is that they need to produce Olympians. So there's a big focus.
Yeah,
there.
well, yes and no. I mean, look, they do, but by the same token, everyone through that sport thing, their job is to get more humans moving, similarly to ours. Now, sport has gone through this issue that they're trying to grapple with, and there's some of the sports, and we call them the non-permission sports, of which bike riding is one. Well, there's a whole lot of people doing this that aren't actually a club member. They're never going to race. They're never going to join a club. People do that when they're cycling, riding bikes, swimming, running, skiing, surfing. You go down to the surf and see the number of people there who are really good surfers. They're never going to surf in a competition. They just do it because they like it and it's fun. Bike riding is very much the same. So that's the real struggle that the sporting bodies have grappled with, because their model has always been built around, you sign up to the club, you pay them a registration fee, you're then in their system, and it's a very formal old school system, and the world's changed like that. People are saying, that's not how I want to interact, that's not what I want to do. I want to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it to fit in with my lifestyle. That's been the big challenge, I think, that sport in Australia is still really grappling with.
Yeah. One thing I'm always sort of frustrated with Cycling Australia is they do have that high level competitor in their focus. I don't see Cycling Australia doing much in terms of getting the commuter, looking after the average cyclist. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think they think about it, but it's hard to get your head around for that reason. That the basic model is you sign up to be a club member, and then it sort of filters up through the classic tiered structure that we see in sport. And it is interesting because, people intersect on bikes. Like I say, why do people ride a bike? There's basically three reasons. One, they're just doing it to get around. They're not thinking that much about it. It's just moving around. Another one, they do it just to enjoy themselves. Bike riding's fun. It's great fun. And the other, people are testing themselves. They are saying, I want to do a sport. I want to test myself. The Cycling Australia body has tended to focus most on the people who are testing themselves, not worrying as much about the people who are just enjoying themselves or the people who are just trying to move around. When in reality, I think from the sport perspective, how do you start playing a sport? You generally start doing it by just enjoying yourself. You don't play test cricket unless you've gone out in the backyard and played as a little kid or something. That's generally what you have to start in these other areas. And that's where I think they probably miss the opportunity of understanding that this grassroots level of people who aren't doing it to, they probably have no thoughts of ever, riding in the Olympics or going to the Tour or going to the national championships or something like that. But that's where they're going to find those people, because out of that, they all filter their way up to the top if they get bitten enough by the bug that they love it that much, or they happen to have an incredible talent. That's how you find them.
You know, it's funny you say this because I hear from local clubs when the cyclists rock up, you know, that Cycling Australia are taking a chunk of money for this and they want fees for this. And so then I think about funding. Well, I've heard that, you know, Cycling Australia get their funding because they focus on, you know, producing elite Olympians. And plus they also have memberships. So then I think about your funding. I mean, you produce a lot of Gran Fondo type rides. You've done these for years. Is that the bulk of your funding, or is it from memberships?
Yeah, we work basically 50% from events we run, 25% from membership, and 25% from other things. And you say, what are the other things? They're essentially some government support for some of our programs, like Ride to School and Ride to the Train Station, some corporate support. And then we have two other really what I'd call entrepreneurial businesses. One, we run a bike parking service. So we sell the bits of metal, design, sell, install bike parking, mainly under buildings in city type areas. And then we also do bike counting, where we count bikes, we gather the data and we provide that data to councils to help them with their planning as well.
Sounds good. Diversifying. You know, talking about this bike parking, it's a big problem, obviously, having bikes stolen and stuff. I mean, is this bike parking obviously is a very secure way to do it? And are there any recommendations on how people can not have their bike stolen when they go to work?
Yeah, look, there's kind of the three places where you have your bike. You either have it at home, you either have it on the street, or you have it locked up at your work or somewhere like that, or maybe at a train station. No doubt the key thing is put a D-lock on your bike. That's the best way, because it's hardest for a person to get through the D-lock. But, you know, and I know someone said to me, carry a D-lock, what am I getting ready for armed combat? It's a heavy, bulky thing. It's annoying.
It's hard to carry.
It's annoying to carry.
Yeah.
But that's no doubt one key thing. And it's very interesting, you know, we're doing some work trying to think about bike parking at the moment and what should it be like on the street? Because, you know, and I did a little exercise where I just took photos for a week of bikes parked all over the place wherever I could see them. And over the time, I was like, over the course of a week, I was like, one of the things was, what's the most expensive bike I could find parked on the street? Right? The most expensive bike for a week of looking I could find on the street was an Avanti that would probably retail for $1,200. Right?
Yep.
Nothing more expensive in a week. Then I thought, now I have a look for cars parked on the street, and I found a $250,000 car in 2 minutes. People just, their bikes, they won't park them on the street because they're so worried about them getting pinched. But it tends to be, if you have an old clunker, then you'll leave it on the street. That's a problem.
It is a problem. And I remember riding my very expensive $4,000 mountain bike into the library in the city. So what's the main library? The
State Library.
State Library in the city there. Parked my bike out the front, locked it up on a chain, very thick chain, came out, it was gone. Not only was the bike gone, but the chain and lock were gone. And I was told by a police officer that there's groups that specifically go around targeting little zones like this. Have you had discussions with the authorities on this problem? Yeah,
we have, and it's a terror. Like when your bike's stolen too. Unfortunately, I've never had it, but we know emotionally, it's so upsetting for people to come out and your bike's gone, because for many people, their bike, they love them. And it's probably the same with your bike. It's their pride and joy.
I was devastated.
Everyone is always devastated. And you know, we talk and how do we reduce bike theft, and we try and look at it. But you know, it's a sad part of life, isn't it? That's someone's business. Your business is, producing compelling content that hopefully this becomes someone's business is going around stealing bikes and selling them. Incredible.
It's unreal, isn't it?
It is. You know, surely you could do something better with your life.
Yeah. No, just incredible. Craig, I said this would go for an hour. It's nearly an hour and a half now, and I'm sure you've got things to do. So I want to ask you a lot more questions, but maybe we could do a take two at some stage. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, no worries. Thanks so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Absolute pleasure. And we'll see you hopefully in version 2.
All right. Wonderful.